Welcome to Desperately Seeking the 80s. I am Meg.
And I am Jessica. And Meg and I have been friends since 1982. We got through middle school and high school together here in New York City, where we still live.
And where we podcast about New York City in the 80s. I do Ripped from the Headlines.
And I do pop culture.
You're going to miss me.
I am. I already cried.
This is our last recording before you leave
town
forever.
This is why I'm going to die on the plane. Like, that's terrifying. Why would you say that? You know I'm not well. It's something wrong with you.
Jesus Christ. I mean literally forever, but it will feel like forever because you're going for so long.
Yes, thank you. That's very sweet. For our listeners who care, Meg said something very sweet to me about being concerned about my safety, and I burst into tears this morning of sheer gratitude and love. So thank you for being someone who is actually concerned about whether or not I'm here. Thank you. Yes, I'm going to London for little over 2 weeks, 15 days, and very much and possibly to Paris. I found that out today, that my hostess, who also listens to this
So maybe
podcast,
you won't miss me.
Are you
Because
joking?
you'll be in London and
Are you
Paris.
kidding me? Everything that happens, I'm going to be texting it to you. It's
Okay,
going to be
good.
like, so I had a scone and some tea, a scone. There you go. No, I'm excited to get out of New York because it's been a while and I really need a change of scenery, big time. But I had an interesting moment that was entirely based on my ever-present anxieties, which I mentioned to you and you said, save it for the podcast. As is my way, I woke up, like 4 a.m. I was like, what if something happens with the American banks and like my debit card isn't working because I don't like to use credit cards. And what if that happens and then I'm stranded and I have no money and I'll die? And I was like, okay, hold on. Traveler's checks. Just get a fucking traveler's to go to American Express. Guess what? You cannot get traveler's checks anymore.
I wonder if some people even know what a traveler's check is, Jessica.
I think that there's no way that a large swath of the population that is younger than us knows what that is.
Basically, a traveler's check was like a
paper check. You got a book check. And you could buy as many of them as you wanted.
As good as cash in another country.
Right. You would get a book. And American Express generally was the institution that issued them. And you could buy like anything from $100 in traveler's checks to thousands and thousands of dollars. So you get a book of checks. And the great thing about them and why they were traveler's checks and not just cash or whatever, first off, they could only be redeemed by you and they were insured. So if you lost them or if someone stole them, American Express would give you new checks and so you were fine.
They were great to travel with.
No matter where you were. And
I remember when I went to Europe in the late 80s, my grandparents gave me that was my graduation gift, and they gave me $1,000 in traveler's checks, and that's what I had to spend, and that was it. I didn't have a credit card. If I ran out of those checks, I was not going to eat. That was what I traveled on, those checks for gosh, like 3-4 weeks.
Yeah. I mean, and $1,000 meant a lot more at the time. Yeah. So that doesn't exist. So I went on a search and it seems that Visa issues a prepaid card that is insured.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So I was like, but very few banks do it. So I don't know if this is like, I looked it up on the internet. It says that blah, blah, or if it's real. So I'm either going to be able to assuage my worst anxieties by getting one of these travel cards, or I'm just going to have to be a normal person and be like, everything's going to be fine, you dum-dum, and relax. So there you go.
Adventures. So my engagement question, Jessica, is when I say girlfriends, what does that conjure for you?
Bizarrely, and I may have made this up, the first thing that came to mind wasn't there a show that Tracy Ellis Ross was on called Girlfriends?
Maybe.
That might be a complete like Mandela effect, weird. I don't know. But girlfriends, what does it make me think of? Clearing my brain of weird, non-existent ephemera. That's my family. And my girlfriends, as evidenced by you being concerned about my being trafficked once I get to London, it makes me think of love and safety and unconditional acceptance of all of the weirdness that is me, and knowing that I can provide the same thing for those same women. Is that like way too emotional for what you're thinking of?
That's a wonderful answer. And thank you for engaging in it. When I was on my way here trying to figure out how to phrase my engagement question, I was thinking of the relationship between girlfriends is pure. And I was like, no, that's not right. It's more complicated and more interesting than that. But there is a love between girlfriends that is just kind of overwhelming and important. And thank God for it.
Yeah. I mean, you see all of these. I mean, maybe I get served them and others don't. Maybe I clicked once and now my algorithm is flooded with this. But all of those great little clips of old ladies dancing around together. It's like, I want to be like this when I'm 900 years old with my girlfriend at the home.
I think we're halfway there, my friend.
How dare you?
No, that's good. We've held on and made new.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I thought you just meant that we're ancient and decrepit. No, I think, unless I'm woefully mistaken, I think that our group of girlfriends is already there. I love that I just got hysterical about you putting an age on us. And now I'm going to be like, 40 years in, we are the same. 40 years.
And it takes work. Friendships don't happen by magic.
Friendships are very hard. And the girlfriends that I just described are the ones who, when you're young, this is actually another interesting thing that happened recently. I have a female friend who who is not a long-standing friend, who got very, very angry with me and yelled at me about something that had to do with something that was going on with her. And that's fine. But it made me realize that you guys, I don't think we've had an argument, a true argument, in decades. Like, you get that out of your system when you're young. And your point about, it takes work is you have to get through all of that stuff. And that person has to still be hanging around. And that's what I mean by like putting up with the weirdnesses, is that there are so many opportunities for misbehavior, bad arguments, misunderstandings, boy trouble, all kinds of stuff. But it's you get to this point where you're like, oh, we've already had this argument. We don't need to have this again. Like, that's, we put a check mark there. We both know where we stand on this and we're still friends. Like, we're just going to
let's not waste our time.
Yeah, that's just dumb. And to your point about purity, I think that the way that I interpret that is what I just described. It's pure because you don't waste time on anything that's superfluous anymore. It's a very laser focused kind of love and support.
My sources are.
I'm glad you purred.
From the Mouth of a Monster by Robert Mladenich. The Girlfriends podcast, which is great. I'll talk about that more later. And murderpedia.org.
I love Murderpedia.
It is such a great resource. I will talk about that just a minute before I dive into the story. Murderpedia.org, nonprofit organization, they've compiled the articles about said murderer. So you read their little brief description of what happened, and then you can click on the New York Times article, the New York Post article, the LA Times article, the Time Magazine article. They don't have everything there, but they've done their best, and it's a great way to start.
That is amazing. And what a testament to how much people are drawn to Murder Most Foul. Please tell us about today's Miscreant.
I'm going to start in a ugly place, so prepare yourself.
I am prepared.
On Saturday, March 4th, 1989, Joel Rifkin,
Oh, no.
a pudgy loser from Long Island, drove into Manhattan. He'd been having violent fantasies about killing women that had grown, quote, more intense than regular, and his housemate, his mother, had gone whitewater rafting in Colorado, leaving him alone in their home in East Meadow. After an episode of Kojak, Joel headed to a red light district in the East Village between 1st and 2nd Avenues and 11th and 12th Streets. Did you know that that block was a red light district?
I did not.
At around 10 p.m., he picked up Susie and negotiated a price for her to drive back with him to Long Island. She insisted they stop at her friend's place where she bought and smoked some crack before they headed to Joel's house. They had sex in the living room, and she asked him to take her to get more drugs. Instead, he picked up a souvenir howitzer shell.
Weird.
Do you know what that looks like? It looks like a big old bullet.
Yeah.
Okay, I had to look that up. And
But wasn't a howitzer like a big machine gun, like a turret gun?
you know more than I do. And then he savagely beat her with it. He thought she was dead and tried to move her body, but she had more fight in her. She fought back, biting his finger almost to the bone, but he managed to strangle her to death. Panicked about getting caught, part of him expected the police to bust down the door at any minute. This was actually his first murder. He cleaned the living room and dragged her body to the basement, where he put it on the washer dryer and dismembered it with an X-Acto knife.
An X-Acto knife?
Yes.
That is a lot of work. Good God.
He claims this was only to avoid identification, not as any form of sexual gratification. He drove his mother's car to New Jersey, where he dropped the head, which he'd put in a paint can, and the legs in the woods near Hopewell. Then he drove back to Manhattan to the East River near where he'd picked her up and dropped her torso and arms into the water. On March 5th, a golfer at the Hopewell Valley Golf Course came across her head on the 7th hole. It had rolled onto the course.
Oh my God. Wow.
Yeah.
That is intense.
And her legs were found soon after in Pequannock Creek. It was determined that she was HIV positive. Nothing else was known about her until 1993.
Wait, when did that happen? When did that murder happen?
1989.
Okay.
So basically, the head was found, the legs were found, but they didn't know who it was. They just knew a head was found on a golf course.
Right.
Now, 1993, Joel Rifkin was arrested and recounted the details of his murder of Susie. By that time, he had killed 16 more women.
16?
Yes. All of them were drug-addicted sex workers. He was ultimately caught when he was stopped at 3:15 a.m. on June 28, 1993, for driving without a license plate. He had the decomposing body of 22-year-old Tiffany Bresciani in the back of his truck.
Jesus Christ.
He didn't know the last name of his first victim, Susie, but at least now the head and legs found in New Jersey were identified as Joel Rifkin's first victims. But who was Susie? Investigators zeroed in on a sex worker named Susie Spencer, who had been picked up by police a number of times but had not been seen since 1989. But she went by a bunch of different names, and none of the names had been reported missing. In May 1989, a torso washed up near Front Street on Staten Island. It had been 4 years since Gail Katz's disappearance. Do you remember Gail Katz? You will in a moment. Her sister, Elaine, knew in her gut that Gail's plastic surgeon husband, Bob Berenbaum, had murdered her.
Oh.
But there wasn't enough evidence to arrest him. Gail Katz had gone missing, and Bob had been like, I don't know where she is. And all of her friends and family were like, you killed her. And he said, no, I didn't. And that was the end of that.
So Durst-like.
So Durst-like. Even when the torso was identified as Gail's based on x-rays, there was nothing that pointed to Bob as the killer. So Elaine and her family buried Gail's torso in New Jersey. And Bob moved to Las Vegas and started dating again. The reason why this might sound familiar to you and to our listeners is we actually covered this story on the podcast. So all of this is a callback. Bob's type was accomplished professional women in Las Vegas who dated him for a brief period until he did something creepy or exploded in rage at them. And it's a small town. The ex-girlfriends started talking to each other and started connecting the dots. They were all especially alarmed to discover more about his missing wife, Gail. Back in New York, in 1998, the lead investigator in Gail's disappearance told Elaine and the family about DNA and how, if they exhumed the torso, they could find out for sure if it was Gail's. They did so. It wasn't
right.
Gail's torso.
It was Susie's.
You're getting a little ahead of
I
us.
got excited. Okay, sometimes it happens.
This was a crushing blow to the family. Quote, that little shred of closure that I had has now been ripped away, said Elaine at the time. And the now unidentified torso was reburied on Hart Island.
Oh, where we've already been.
Another callback.
Yes, very good.
And there it stayed unidentified until 2013.
Oh my God.
For 20 years, detectives had been trying to figure out who Susie, Joel Rifkin's first victim, really was. Back in 2002, Simon & Schuster published From the Mouth of the Monster, which was a compilation of interviews with Joel Rifkin, his mother, and people who had known him. All of these details from different sources were now compiled in one nasty little paperback. And some people started making connections.
Interesting.
Based on Joel's description of where and when he picked up Susie, the New Jersey detectives thought to comb through arrest mugshots of sex workers who worked on Manhattan's Lower East Side in the late 80s. They compared those photos with a reconstructive sketch of the head found on the golf course.
I'm so glad that you brought this up because despite the fact that I said Susie and broke into your story, I've been dying to ask you, why didn't anyone reconstruct the head and look at mugshots? And they did, finally. Okay.
They finally did.
Okay.
They finally did.
Wait, that's how much you've taught me on this podcast, by the way. I just need you to know that within a nanosecond, I'm like, reconstruct, mugshot, talk to people, show it around. Like, thank you, Meg. I have learned I'm a criminologist thanks to you. Please continue this gory, disgusting story.
That's how they focused in on Heidi Balch. The problem was that Heidi had not been reported missing until 2001, and Susie was murdered in 1989. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Heidi.
Okay.
Heidi was born in 1964, the daughter of Gretchen and Tom, neither of whom were equipped for or interested in having a child. In spite of their neglect, Heidi showed a lot of creativity and promise in school. Her grandmother, Nana, tried to get custody. But Tom and Gretchen, who were divorced by this point, seemed hell-bent on both ignoring their small child and preventing anyone from helping her.
Well, that sounds really great.
Her cousins remember at a family reunion, 12-year-old Heidi was worried she was pregnant and that she had hepatitis from needle sharing.
Oh my fucking God.
She was put in a reform school, but Tom, her dad, took her out. He hated institutions. And he gave her permission at 14 to hitch a ride to Hollywood with a long-distance truck driver.
I really hope that part of the story is that her parents came to a terrible end.
Not really, I'm sorry.
Mm.
Acting didn't pan out in Hollywood, so at 16, she found her way to New York to be a hand and face model. She was arrested multiple times for robbery and assault and solicitation. A man in need of a green card paid her $1,500 to marry him. Heidi's aunt, Anne, kept reaching out to check up on her, but she could only get in touch with this new husband who said she was out of town or busy, but ultimately doing fine. Frustrated by what turned into years of silence, Heidi's family chose to believe she joined a cult or changed her name.
That's very specific. Ugh. Those poor people.
Her Aunt Anne, against Tom's wishes, finally filed a missing persons report in 2001. Then, in 2013, New Jersey detectives suspected that Joel Rifkin's first victim, the head on the golf course, was Heidi Bolsch because of the mugshots,
right,
and confirmed their suspicions with the help of Aunt Anne through DNA.
Wow.
Based on case records, they were then able to identify that the torso on Hart Island, which had washed up on Staten Island in 1989 and been buried in Gail Katz's grave for a decade, was indeed Heidi Bolsch. All of Heidi's remains were cremated and her ashes were laid to rest in Florida with her family. Years ago, Mindy and Carol, the ex-girlfriends of Bob Berenbaum, the ones in Las Vegas, helped bring Bob to justice for Gail's sake, a woman they had never met. They were similarly haunted by the misidentified torso.
Oh, wow.
They dug through records and made countless phone calls to medical examiners and former detectives and finally discovered that it was Heidi. And they were able to put Heidi's Aunt Anne in touch with Gail's sister, Elaine.
Wait, so they were part of figuring out that the torso wasn't Gail?
No.
Okay, I'm confused. I'm sorry.
So when DNA became a big deal, Gail's family dug up the torso just to make sure that it was Gail, and it was not.
Right.
So then that torso was put on Hart Island. In the meantime, we've got two ex-girlfriends of Bob Berenbaum. Everyone knew that Bob was guilty, but they were able to finally give enough information so that Bob got put in jail.
What was the info? I'm so fascinated.
Okay.
Was it like behavior or?
I mean, this is a callback and you should, it's been a while since we recorded
I'm sorry
that podcast.
that I don't.
No. That's totally fine. Like, it was the same evidence existed back in the 80s as existed when he was finally put in jail almost 20 years later. But because the ex-girlfriends, like, they started connecting the dots a little bit more. So the evidence was still the same, but it was just so much more compelling.
I see.
Maybe because, domestic violence is now something that is discussed more and taken seriously. And at the time it wasn't. Maybe because the one ex-girlfriend was able to say, I was there when he got a phone call from detectives saying, we think we might have found Gail. And he said, I doubt it's Gail, and hung up the phone. Who the hell does that?
Okay, I get it. All right.
Right. And so these women had started meeting and started saying, wait, he raged at you? He raged at me too. Hold on. Do you guys know that there's like a missing wife? He has a missing wife. And then they got in touch with Elaine, the sister, and she had all kinds of stuff to add. So all the circumstantial evidence piled up.
I totally understand. And by the way, like, what more evidence could you want about the power of storytelling? Because all of those facts that the police had, they don't matter until you put it in a context and create a narrative.
Right.
And that is amazing. So those women told the right story. That is so impressive.
And they weren't giving up.
Good.
Then, after they succeeded in helping get Bob convicted, they were like, wait, what about that misidentified torso? Who is she? And when they figured out who she was, they put Heidi's Aunt Anne in touch with Gail's sister Elaine.
I just got chills.
All these women connected by tragedy and crazy coincidences have found peace by telling Heidi and Gail's stories. And Gail's remains have never been found.
That is haunting.
And I just want to say the callbacks, we've got 3 awesome callbacks. Episode 40, Operation Wife Dump. That was about Gail. Yes, we did, in fact,
Call it that.
God damn. Episode 73, Special Child and Disco Queen of 66. That's about Hart Island. And episode 5, Where's Kathy? And Preps for Sale. Kathy Durst, one of our first episodes. Because, again, do you remember the girlfriends who were like,
oh, yeah.
Wait
her
a second.
girlfriends were like, he freaking killed her. We all know it. And
the
this
detectives
they were like,
are like,
we
no,
don't
there's
believe
like,
you."
women run away all the time.
Yeah, well.
No, they don't. Not without their shoes and a credit card. They do not do that.
So
What the
insane.
fuck?
Oh my God. That's a very difficult story to react to because it is both heartwarming and bone chilling. Ooh, heartwarming, bone chilling. Look at that. Yeah, really, that's a hard one. That requires some digesting. But well done.
I know. Oh, and I have to talk about the Girlfriends podcast, because on that podcast, please listen to the first season, which is about Bob Barenbaum and how those women
brought him to justice.
And season 2 is about how they helped identify the unidentified torso.
Unbelievable.
Heidi. And oh my God, Jessica, I did not even tell you all the heartbreaking details of this lost child's life that she did not have a chance in hell. It's not okay what happened to her. And they talk about it a lot on the podcast, the Girlfriends. If you can stomach.
Well, you know I can't stomach it. And I get very, 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 very upset about child-related stuff. It just I can take a lot, and I am leveled when it's about a kid. It is so unbelievably easy to victimize a child.
Her mother, Gretchen, I think she had substance abuse. I know that she had substance abuse problems. The father is more interesting to me because he was a hippie and he was so against, like I said, institutions, and so selfish that he would continue to prevent her from getting any kind of attention and help from her teachers. And she was the sacrifice for his strongly held hippie beliefs that institutions suck.
Yeah, when you have a child, guess what? Check your ideology at the door.
Honest to God. Let's end on a happy note, though. The girlfriends.
Yes. Yay! Girlfriends will always help each other. Yay!
Hey, look out for each other.
Hurrah. Hurrah. Okay, so before I start my piece, I did look up that there was indeed a show. This is how ridiculous I feel. Called Girlfriends with Tracy Ellis Ross. It was on for 8 seasons. So yeah, that happened. Clearly, cool. I wasn't watching it. It started in 2000.
Oh, I wasn't watching a lot of TV.
Neither was I. I was very busy being a very active person. So I have a question for you.
Okay.
Could you please restate where Heidi/Susie was working in 1989?
Working? Oh, the red light district? Mm-hmm. Between 1st and 2nd Avenues and between 11th and 12th Streets.
Okay, so sometimes you and I really have to cast around for what's the tie-in.
Oh,
Not today, baby.
wow. What are
So
the odds?
today, I am taking us on a little trip to one of the coolest, most beloved dive bars in the East Village called Downtown Beirut,
Mm.
First Avenue between 9th and 10th.
Wow.
And
Is it still there?
no, it's long gone.
Okay.
And weirdly, some articles from the time period place it between 10th and 11th, but it was between 9th and 10th because I actually have the building number.
How interesting.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Crazy. So I'm going to get us started off. Before I do, here's my engagement question. What was your favorite bar? Dive bar. I know you like me, you love a cruddy bar.
I am going to give two answers.
Okay.
One is Tile Bar,
Located on
7th Street and First Avenue on the
Mhm.
corner. But really, and that's still there.
Mhm.
God bless it.
Although it's been kind of cleaned up. It has like an awning now and it actually calls itself Tile Bar,
I know.
which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But, okay.
But I'm just happy it's still there.
Yes, agreed.
But really Verkhovna, which is a Ukrainian bar across the street, because I lived on 7th Street, right across the street from us. I've talked about it on the podcast, I think. And Bill was the bartender there. And Joe and I would just sort of stumble over there like way too often. And at a certain time of night, usually about 2 a.m, Bill would just like lock the door and all the regulars would just be there and we could drink all night long if we wanted to. And he didn't even charge us. I mean, he just like an awesome guy. And I run into him every once in a while on the street, Bill. He's like moved around to different places and I haven't seen him now for a couple of years, but awesome guy. Awesome guy.
Love that. I had a whole bunch of places that I really loved, two of which I will talk about in just a moment. And right on that same stretch in the early aughts was a place called the Coal Yard, which I've talked about on this podcast, that was owned and run by a guy I knew who then became a woman I knew named Molly, and then is now at the International Bar. But that whole stretch was a mecca of dive bars. And it was really like from 5th Street up to 12th between 1st and B.
Yeah.
That was like the mecca of all of the great, great dive bars that were actually bars for people in the arts and
True.
young people. So we're going to talk about downtown Beirut. So I'm glad that you mentioned Tile and
Verkhovna
for two reasons. One is the location. The other one is we're going to talk about all things Ukrainian as well on this
What are these
segment.
odds?
I know. Well, if we're talking about that area,
True.
Very high.
Yes, right.
Yes.
KGB, that's a great bar.
Let us begin. I wanted to talk about dive bars just because I love them so much. And every single one of them, while they look the same on the outside or similar, they are so different. And the culture inside each one of them in the 80s was wildly, wildly different. And they serve different needs and different types of arty folk in different ways. And downtown Beirut, by all accounts, was aptly named because it looked like a bombed out nightmare. And like all good dive bars, it was filthy even on the outside, like dirtier than the sidewalk. And it had neon in the windows and the big sign over the door said Beirut, and then sort of it looked like it was a smaller sign tacked on, sort of catty corner up on the upper left. It just said downtown. So downtown Beirut. So I started doing some research and I knew I was onto something when I found a Facebook group that's dedicated to downtown Beirut. And all of the people who used to go there are, not all of them, a lot of them are on there finding each other and talking about it.
That is probably the only remaining good thing about Facebook are these Facebook groups that, go, oh, don't you remember when?
Yeah.
We
And
used to go to this place or do this thing, and
right. There was no way to create a digital community at the time. So the fact that they're going back now to do it is really, it's nice and creates sort of consistency for
also
people.
very helpful for us when we are trying to find out about things that don't exist anymore.
We are incredibly grateful that people desperately need community.
Yes.
Thank you. What everyone was talking about, there were a couple of people were like, did anyone ever see Melissa again? Did anyone ever see this person again? Which, by the way, also made me think of poor Heidi. And they're all women who no one's seen again, by the way. So that was a little
chilling.
disconcerting. But what everyone talked about was the jukebox. Now, for those who do not know, a jukebox, before everything was digitized, a jukebox could make or break a bar. And it could make or break your experience at a bar, because that's where the music was coming from. There was no, phone or iPod or whatever that was getting attached to a speaker system. So the jukebox, and not only the jukebox, but who are the people who are going to play what when you're there? And I can't remember where I saw this. It might have been in a book that I read, but the ultimate prank was just playing the same song over and over and over until everyone you don't like leaves. But the jukebox was a very, very big deal. And all accounts of it say that it had a lot of heavy, like not heavy metal, but like punk, hardcore, thrash, that kind of thing. So boy, was I surprised when the Facebook group, one person says, my favorite song on the jukebox was Husker Du 8 Miles High. And 8 million people are like, me too. I love that song. And then someone else follows with, well, the flip side was Love Is All Around, their cover of the theme of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, which this other person loved playing. Someone else says, Cure, Just Like Heaven. And it's like, yeah, isn't that just assumed? Like, shouldn't we just be like, well, duh. Okay. Someone else says, and then many people weigh in, that it's the best song was Wichita Lineman by a cover by Urge Overkill. Someone else says, Wife's, Seasons in the Sun, Terry Jacks, which, by the way, is a song that makes me want to rip my ears off my head. Like, I can't abide it. Horrible. Someone else says, and I love how people write these things, Heroes, David Bowie, and Cinnamon Girl, Neil Young. Another thing I cannot abide, and I know we're going to lose listeners over this, is Neil Young. Neil Young's voice, great songwriter, and he was great in Buffalo Springfield. There are some songs that he sang on before he became Neil Young. Mm-hmm. But his voice, we're going to lose more people right now. I can't stand Joni Mitchell's voice either.
Jessica, you shouldn't say that, especially not right now.
I know. Why?
I feel like people are talking a lot about Joni Mitchell for some reason.
Is she unwell? I mean, I know she's unwell. She's very old and I've seen her. She doesn't look great, but did she?
No, nothing bad.
Okay.
I think she's in the zeitgeist maybe because of the Bob Dylan movie.
Yes. My worst fantasy is a duet by Neil Young and Joni Mitchell, which I'm sure
unlikely
someplace. Someone else's favorite song was The Voluptuous Horror of Karen Black by Alaska. Someone else, and this is the last one, I'm trying to find the painted black cover that was in the Beirut jukebox circa 86, 87, 88. Anyone know who it was by? Immediately, someone responded, it was the Avengers, and it was the B-side of the Thin White Line single.
Whoa.
So, unsurprisingly, this made me think of our friend Alex, who unsurprisingly also wrote about downtown Beirut.
Oh, did he?
Yes.
Of course.
So, the fanatical nature of people who went to these dive bars and why they loved the bar, it was the people. And now at downtown Beirut, everyone who wrote about it was like, oh God, the bartender. A woman.
Okay.
With green hair. Remember in the 90s, Janine Garofalo had this haircut for a while, the tiny, tiny Betty Page bangs, yes. And then the long hair. So she had that haircut, but green, long black fingernails. And she simply would not serve you if she did not know you. You were absolutely ignored. And she created the sense of you belong or you don't belong.
Ooh.
And that's another thing. as you just said about Bill, a bartender will make or break a dive bar because it's so small. The number of people you can get in that bar is limited. And so the people who are coming have to come back and they have to stay and they have to drink a lot. This woman, whose name I could not find, was it. And as you'll hear in a little bit, the way you knew that you were a regular was when she finally looked at you. That was it. That was when you were in. So on the corner of 10th and 1st, just to give you some local color, was a deli at 162 First Avenue, where Dee Ramone used to get his morning coffee after he got his morning heroin. It has been vacant for a while now. At 160 was Gizmo Sewing Supply. Now it is Sabor a Mexico Taqueria. 158, it was Use on First, which replaced Mary's Dairy, an ice cream parlor, which, by the way, was great. Before that, it was Standard, a stylish and mellow bar that came after Downtown Beirut, a classic punk bar featured in, because all things come back to this for us, After Hours.
Yes. I think I've talked about Downtown Beirut then.
I think that you did, because I think
Yes.
you know why? You know why? It stood in for Berlin. It was the location they used for Berlin.
Exactly.
Even though there was a club called Berlin, they didn't use that one. They used Downtown Beirut because it had the right vibe.
Right.
There you go. Meaning a hellscape that he couldn't get out of.
Right.
At 156 was Hello Banana Vintage. It was also Amy Van Doren, as in Mamie Van Doren's Modern Love Club, a matchmaking service.
Huh.
And PS 122 was there. Public school turned performance art space in 1979, where Spalding Gray, Penny Arcade, Karen Finley, Quentin Crisp, and so many others would perform. And Ira Gershwin supposedly attended school there. So that's our location. If you went from 10th to 9th, that's what you would encounter. What else was going on around there? As you mentioned, it was a very Eastern European scene. What was so important when you're out drinking down there was what's going to soak up the booze. And what's going to soak up the booze every time? Eastern European cooking. Starch heavy. You want a dumpling, you want a pierogi.
Selka.
Yes. At the time, there was a proliferation of Ukrainian, Polish, other Eastern European places, and they were inexpensive, served the community, but everyone knew that's where you can get the cheapest food, and it would keep you from falling down drunk. So if you were really smart, you'd go in, you'd lay down a base, as we used to say, of matzo balls or whatever, go hit it hard, and then come back out and have some fried food. So to my delight, I found a review of that scene. So I'm going to read a little something to you. This was from the Vanishing New York blog.
Yes.
A
Love it.
June 1986 New York Magazine article recalls the days when, on a Sunday morning, you could not get into the Kiev because the tables were jammed with customers. This was during a boom in Polish and Ukrainian coffee shops in the East Village, what they called a blitzkrieg. Today, it's hard to imagine having cheap Slavic food being the culinary goldmine that it was. In the neighborhood, there were Leshko's, Odessa, known as a crowded money machine, Polonia, Christine's, Lillian's, KK's, Bruno's, Teresa's, and Yolanta. Quote, "They see us getting rich," said the co-owner of Christine's about his competition. Bruno of Bruno's agreed. There's a lot of money in Polish food.
Amazing.
Why? Because everyone in the bars went there. So imagine how many bars there were. Many more than the Ukrainian and Polish restaurants that they named right there. So what bars did I feel that way about that were there in roughly that time or a little bit after? Because I was trying to remember, like, was there any place I really went consistently in the 80s? And it's like, no, other than Dorian's, like that was it. So we're going to go a little further ahead in time. And I just wanted to talk about the Lakeside Lounge, which I'm sure you recall. No?
No, I don't think so.
Oh my goodness, Meg. Okay, the Lakeside Lounge and Siberia. Have you ever been to Siberia?
I don't
Were you
think
ever
so.
there?
You need to
Okay.
tell me what neighborhood
So,
we're in.
all right. So this is, again, dive bars, why they're so great in New York. Because the people who start they're independently owned, and the people who start them for a reason. Frequently, they're artists or art adjacent and just want someplace to drink. Siberia was a particularly nutty place. It was the one place I went when I was at the height of my misbehavior. It was like what I imagined downtown Beirut was. If you went to 50th Street and Broadway and went down into the subway,
Whoa.
there was halfway down the staircase into the subway, there was a bar called Siberia.
Yeah, I did not go there. It sounds very cool and scary.
Well, it was fascinating because it was a mix there were a lot of journalists who went there and a lot of punks, as well as people who were really gritty and creepy and scary. In my book, Clonopin Lunch, I wrote about the first time I ever went there, and it was everything you could have wanted cinematically. I was like, Martin Scorsese, just get here with your camera because this is what you wanted for After Hours and you will want it again. They didn't have a stage. They had a 3-foot by 3-foot space where they essentially stacked musicians on top of each other. And it was just terrible, terrible punk bands that could not play, but loud as hell. 2 different pinball machines, one always broken, one I believe was Dukes of Hazzard, packed shoulder to shoulder, so hot in the middle of winter that you had to take off everything, but you're almost down to a bra. It's so hot in there. And they served everything in plastic cups, which were all on the floor, as were most of the journalists who had had so much to drink that they would just slump gently to the ground like human bean bags, just bye-bye. There you go. It was relatively close to some of the music rehearsal spaces on the West Side. So bands knew of it and would go to this place. So that was a place I loved because you couldn't make it up. It was just its own madness. The Lakeside Lounge was Avenue B and 10th. So we're back in the East Village. It was all about the music. That was one of the most incredible places because there was no attitude. There was no nasty bartender. Everyone was welcome if you weren't a jerk. They had a back room where up-and-coming bands, or let's just face it, flat-out shitty bands would play. But they also had bands that were really great and established that knew it was a place to stop in and play if you wanted to. It also had a magnificent jukebox with all kinds of obscure, wonderful stuff. A lot of rockabilly, because that was also the time of rockabilly, but every genre you could possibly imagine, from bubblegum rock to, hardcore, but lots of rockabilly. And their claim to fame was that they had a photo booth. And I had a friend who I'm still friends with, and so this person will remain unnamed. The number of hookups this person got
in the phone booth?
At the bar. And then he would have a photo with his partner, and then he lived very close by, take them home. After that era was over, there is a box filled with photo booth photos of conquests.
Whoa.
Yes. And I didn't know about it. I ran across it a couple of years ago and I was like, dude, number one, I'm impressed. You pulled a lot of people. My God. I had no idea you were so busy. But I found a wonderful write-up about Lakeside in New York Music Daily, another blog on WordPress. So owners Jim Marshall, also known as The Hound, an astute and encyclopedic blues and soulologist, also with a great blog, and Eric Roscoe Amble of the Dell Lords, and eventually lead guitarist in Steve Earle's band, had a game plan, create a space that nurtures artists rather than exploiting them as so many venues do. Artists far too popular for the back room, which I already described as the land of I'm working on it, would play here just for the fun of it. Steve Earle, Rudy Ray Moore, Graham Parker, John Sinclair, the Sadies, Reckless Eric, and Amy Rigby all had gigs there. And it launched the careers of countless Americana-ish acts, also a big thing happening at the time, including Laura Cantrell, Amy Allison, Mary Lee's Corvette, Megan Riley, Tom Clark and the High Action Boys. Love that name, by the way. Tammy Faye Starlight, and Spanking Charlene, a band I don't know about, but again, kudos on the name. When there, you could still get a $3 Pabst or a very stiff well drink for $6. The only rule was that to work at Lakeside, you had to be smart and you had to be cool. Although I did not take a photograph of every person I met there, many, many fond memories. So back to downtown Beirut. Why do people love it? The jukebox. So I actually watched a movie that someone did about downtown Beirut. It looks like a student film. It's somewhat scripted with clearly student actors doing it. But the rest of it is just a lot of shots of what was going on at the bar. So I looked at this video and I was so delighted because all of the accounts, including our friend Alex, which I'll read in a second, are about how this was a hardcore place. Let me tell you what was actually on the jukebox. Rock and Roll Part 1 from Gary Glitter, as well as Rock and Roll Part 2. You Don't Own Me, Leslie Gore. B-side, Sunshine Lollipops. Squirrel Baits, Slake Train Coming. I think that might be hardcore. Bobby Darin, Mac the Knife and Beyond the Sea. Ian Dury and the Blockheads. That is a bit hardcore. What a Waste. The Jesus and Mary Chain. The Toasters, Try and Try Again. And amazingly, Terry Jack's Season in the Sun was caught on film, as well as the song troublingly named Put the Bone In. And Little Eva, Locomotion, and B-side, He Is the Boy.
Eclectic.
Indeed. Because we love him so much, I'm going to let our friend Alex speak for himself about why he loved this bar. He says he can't remember the first time that he set foot in the bar, but it was around 88 or 89, relatively late in its storied tenure. It did indeed have a robustly adventurous jukebox of the old school variety, and he was, and I quote, gobsmacked to find bands like the Buzzcocks and Modern Lovers on it. He was an intern at Spin Magazine at the time, which meant he was making $3 a year. And he had a friend play at downtown Beirut, a garage noise band called the Bastards of Execution. And he says, to my recollection, downtown Beirut feels like the place where in the 80s transformed into the 90s, the decade that would eventually turn the bar's lights out. By 1994 or so, it was but a memory. To this day, as proved by the Facebook group, to this day, invoke its name and watch folks who pair their graying temples with increasingly ill-fitting Luna Chicks t-shirts get moist around the eyes. Many of today's bars try to emulate its singular brand of grimy, punky cool, but it is now the stuff of legend. I've already said that one of the reasons people loved it so much, as any dive bar is loved, is because it was really an insider's club. My last bit of why do people love dive bars like this? Because the only people who go there, really, if you're not in trouble, are young people and artists. And it's a time that reflects that you are growing, you are becoming something new, and you're willing and excited to be in a place that is, at least has a veneer of danger. You're taken out of the humdrum in a really extreme way. And so to my surprise, there's a book about this. And there are different articles about people who love their dive bar.
Oh, I love it.
And the amazing writer Alyssa Chappelle wrote about downtown Beirut. And I will read you a quick selection. Come here often. 53 writers raise a glass to their favorite bar. My future husband might have suggested that we meet at another bar. There were lots of other places downtown that were, a lot more welcoming. At the Blue and Gold, the Polish bartender, who could pass for Pope John Paul II's disgraced brother, greeted you with a wave of his grimy bar rag. At King Tut's Wawa Hut, a tattooed art student with a yellow beehive and tangerine lipstick shook her hips to the B-52s, and every third drink was on the house. The Holiday had red leather baguettes, Sinatra and the Smiths on the jukebox, and a pool table. Instead, he picked downtown Beirut for our first date. Aptly named, it looked as though it had sustained a mortar blast and brazenly risen from the ashes. How can I romanticize a bar with the aura of a war zone, a place psychically wrapped in barbed wire? And yet, she does. So, read the book.
Love it.
Anyway, that was someplace I'd never been. I wished I had been. And I love giving these little tours of New York through bars, restaurants, etc. So maybe in the coming year, who knows, we'll take a tour. Okay, so I just want to say that although I said we have a very obvious tie-in, I love you so much because you were like, what's the tie-in? Torso. And the number of times you have said the word torso on this podcast is epic. We should like find that out, how many times you said that.
So our obvious tie-in was location. But what about something about girlfriends hanging out in dive bars? I don't know.
I don't know.
No.
Because like most of my dive bar experiences were with my guy friends.
It's fair. Community.
Yes.
Okay.
That's so much nicer because I was like, dismemberment, danger.
Speaking of community, share our podcast with your community. We love you.
Yes, please do.